Hi everybody, we are Group 4. Today we want to introduce the topic credit derivative, CDS. These are our group members, Junni Zhen, Meixi Li, and Aoseng Wong. And this is our category today. Today I'm going to talk about first one, credit risk, and the second, CDS. Credit risk. What is credit risk? When we talk about investment, there will always be a risk. If you lend out your money to others, the risk you will take is unable to receive the interest or the principal back and lose all the money. And this is called credit risk. Also could be called default risk. So the risk is based on two things. First, the reference entity credit, which means like the company's credit. If a company has a good ability to pay back the debt, risk credit could be really low. And the second is based on the whole economy of the world. If the world is suffering in a financial crisis, the credit risk of a company will be higher than compared to the other periods of the company. Then, how can we evaluate credit risk? In the beginning, there wasn't a popular regulation to measure credit risk or risk until 1988. Basel Bank with other banks, in order to stable the market and reduce the risk of the bank, they established a Basel record. Now there is a third version of it. And in this Basel record, there was a part that regulate how people measure the risk of a company or the risk of a country. Now, based on the Basel record, there are three companies which has a different system running the rating business of the credit risk. And this is the chart. When we see at the top of the chart, this is the chart of the ranking. When we can take Standard Proof for example. The highest ranking of the Standard Proof is the toppest one, which is AAA. The AAA has a less default possibility. For example, for a 5-year maturity bond, the default risk will be lower than 0.5%. So you just have a little chance to meet the default in a regular situation. And next, we look at the BBB standard risk. If a bond is a BBB level, like it will call a speculative bond, which means like in a regular condition, these bond could be defaulted. And when we see the BB minus rank, the bond that lower than a BB minus rank will be called junk bond, which means that it has like high possibility that the company or country don't have the ability to pay back the debt, and these bonds are possible and could be default anyway. Next, CDS. What is CDS? CDS is a contract to protect the bondholders or other fixed income holders. The name CDS, credit default swap, means that it can swap the credit risk to others, just like a kind of insurance. And current situation. Nowadays, The trading money of the CDS market is the largest in the world. It has $3.63 trillion trading in the market in 2018. However, even if it is the biggest market, it is not a highly liquidity company to the individual investor. Because if people want to trade CDS, they need to sign a special contract called e-stock contract with the bank. So like only a part of people have the chance to do it. They must be really rich or have some relationship with the bank, so and can trade. Now, how does CDS work? In a CDS contract, there will be three characters. First is a buyer of the CDS. Second, seller of the CDS. And the last is a reference entity, which means a company or a country who issues the bond or the fixed income assets. Okay, the buyer of the CDS is the one who wants to avert the risk to credit risk to the seller. They may have hold a bunch of bond position. However, they afraid of the default risks. And the seller will be the trading opponent to the buyer. The seller will think like the bond won't default, not like buyer afraid of the default risk. So they will pleasure to be the seller of the CDS. And in the rule of the contract, the buyer of the CDS need to pay premium to the seller of the CDS in a period of time, which is just like a kind of payment of insurance, and the seller can make profit in it. But however, when the credit event occurs, such as the bond default, the seller needs to pay for all the losses of the bond to the buyer. We can look at the chart. The buyer protection buyer needs to pay like quarter payments of X basis point per year. Basis point means like 100 basis points equals 1%. So in 2006, in the peak of the chart, the buyer needs to pay 17.34% of interest to the seller of CDS. And in the opposite way, when the default occurred, the seller needs to pay the par value of the bond. Credit event. We talked about default in the last slide, but this default is not the only credit event. There are like six kind of credit events, which is bankruptcy, failed play, repudiation, obligation, acceleration, obligation default, and restructuring binding for all credits. So each of these credit events can trigger the CDS contract. Okay, last I want to talk about the type of the CDS. First is the contingent CDS, which could be called CCDS. It's a derivative of the derivative, means that the CDS will honor an agreement only when like two conditions are fulfilled, not one. For example, the CDS wrote that it must be A company bound default, and in the same time the B company rate need to higher than BB plus. So if the two conditions all fulfilled, the contract will be triggered. And second, binary CDS. Binary CDS means the payback of the seller for the seller to the buyer is not the compensate of the bond. The money that the seller go back to buyer will be a specific number, which is negotiated by both of them before they sign the contract. Third is a dynamic CDS. A dynamic CDS linking to the notation amount to the value of the swap daily. And the fourth one is basic of CDS. This kind of CDS contract refer to multiple reference and have multiple application. And next, we will welcome Meishili for the next part. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Meishili. Today I will introduce you our project part 3, how to use CDS. The CDS has two main uses. The first one is hedge, the second one is speculate. First, I will introduce you the hedge. The first person to use the term hedge was Alfred Winslow Jones. He felt that the stock market was unpredictable, but it was much easier to predict the prospects of a company. So I could buy into a good company and then sell a bad company. In this way, the influence of the stock market is removed. If the two companies are right, if I didn't choose it wrong, so I can make profit from it. This is the concept of hedge from the very beginning. Nowadays, the application of hedging has been extended to all aspects of financial field. We can hedge exchange rate risk, hedge interest rate risk, and hedge certain raw material risks. Or you can think about it, but the idea has never changed. The main idea of hedge is to help you to reduce the risk you don't want to take or you cannot take. Let's back to the CDS hedge. What is CDS hedge? I will give you guys a very simple example. We have a long contract with A, and A pays us a certain amount of interest every year and pays off the principal and interest when due. But we are worried about A cannot able to fulfill its obligations because A doesn't have a good financial state. So we want to reduce the risks that we may face. How can we do it? Very simple. We just need to find a third party B, and then we can reach an agreement with B. The content of the agreement is very simple. We have a long contract with A, and A will pay us a certain amount of interest every year. Now, we would like to share the interest with you. But if A cannot fulfill the contract, you need to pay us the part A cannot pay. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking about insurance. Yes, it sounds like insurance, but it's not exactly insurance. They can reduce our risk. Both of them can, but there are some difference. For general insurance, you need to have insurance things like house, like a car, like your leg, your hand. But CDS is different. Without certain corporate bond, you can also buy the CDS of the corporate bond and pay the premium to the CDS seller. Therefore, simply trading CDS as insurance is not a very correct way because it has other use. As we learned from the investment course, everything is risky. So there is a secondary use of CDS, speculate. Also, I will give you a very simple example. If we see that a company's bonds fail to pay the principal and interest, it will default, and others don't know yet, then we can buy the CDS of the company's bonds on a large number. When this company has difficulty in capital turnover as we predicted, the amount of compensation paid by the person who sold you or CDS is our income. During the Europe debt crisis in the past few years, many people were betting on Greece's default, so they bought many CDS related to Greece default. All this is to waiting for Greece to default and receive huge profits, which directly makes many Europe banks face great risks. Like I said before, it's different with insurance, so it does not require you to be stockholder to buy this contract. Therefore, the value of CDS is not restricted by the value of the target. If people are willing to buy, it can be supplied in unlimited number. So at the end, people will find out the value of the CDS is much greater than the target. Then I will introduce the part 4, risk in CDS. Since CDS is a third-party transaction, it is more difficult to supervise. Many large financial institutions have bought CDS from their CDOs for hedging. Their sensitivity to risks is greatly reduced. CDS credit protection function has greatly stimulated the production of more CDOs, and the default risk of those CDOs themselves is very high, which has far exceeded the range that CDS sellers can guarantee. This is the biggest hiding danger of CDS. It is different from insurance. Traditionally, insurance requires the insured to have insurance interest, but the CDS buyer does not need to hold the insurance bonds, and the CDS can be designed to interact with any bond or entity. Therefore, those institutions or funds that value a certain company or certain type of asset or certain country buy CDS and then wait for the reference entity or the value of the reference credit to fall and receive huge compensation. Also, short selling is part of the market pricing mechanism. excessive short selling not only cause sharp market volatility, but even creates a huge impact on the normal operation of related companies. Even those CDS buyers who hold insurance bonds can achieve speculations and even gamble through flexible agreement on credit events. Moreover, positional CDS as an investment tool not only stimulated enthusiasm of professional bond insurance and general insurance companies, but also attract many funds, including hedge funds, to enter the CDS market. Many countries have now banned the transaction of non-physical CDS because due to the extent of the leverage effect, this kind of speculation has completely valued the original intention of CDS, and its consequences are very serious, just like the 2008 financial crisis and the ERP debt crisis. The CDS index has even become a criteria for judging the economic conditions of a country or company. During the Irish financial crisis in 2011, its CDS index reached 606. Meanwhile, China remains at 70 all years round.
Hello, I'm Junyi Zeng. Now it's my turn to report the CDS pricing. As we talked about before, the CDS is like an insurance to help investors to transfer their credit risk. There are two different directions of cash flow. One is from the protection buyer to seller to buy the CDS. The other one is the opposite direction. We called these two different directions as two legs of CDS. One is premium leg. We also call it fee leg. It is a regular stream of payments paid by the protection buyer. The premium must be paid at any period before the maturity date or until the credit event takes place, whichever comes first, and is calculated from this period and paid on the face value of the underlying asset which protection is cherished, and the time of the protection in a year. This period is just the market price of CDS, but it always expressed in basis point or percentage per annum. In particular, the unit conversion of basis point and percentage is 1 basis point equals 0.01%. Another leg is protection leg, also called contingent leg, which made by the protection seller if a credit event occurs before the maturity date. The amount of that payment is actual losses on the face value of the protection triggered by the credit event. It equals the face value times the loss given default. The loss given default equals 1 minus recovery rate. The recovery rate is the estimated percent that will still be repaid to creditors to the protection buyer in the event of a default. But if there is no credit event, a protection seller doesn't need to pay anything to the protection buyer because the buyer didn't lose anything. Now let's take an exercise. Everyone can pause the video and try yourself. The face value of the underlying asset is $10 million, and there are 92 actual days. The recovery rate is 40%, which means the loss given default is 60%. The SPIR rate is 550 basis points, which equals 5.5%. So the premium lag equals the notional amount times the SPIR rate, which is 5.5%, times the actual days, and the protection lag equals the notional amount times 1 minus recovery rate, and it also equals the notional amount times the loss given default. This is our answer. It is very easy, right? After knowing the calculations of these two lags, we can easily figure out the SPIR rate, the market price of CDS. In a fair market trade, the present value of the premium payment should equal the present value of the contingent payment, because there's no free lunch in the world, right? We assume three assumptions to help us easily better understand the methods of calculating the SPIR rate. Firstly, we assume the cash flows are discounted at risk-free rate. Secondly, the recovery rate assumptions. It means the protection buyer will recover the amount of money at this fixed rate of the face value if a default occurs. Lastly, assume the default only occurs at the end of the year. We can directly use a simple example, a 1-year CDS, to explain how to calculate the SPIR rate. Assume the possibility of default PD equals 6%, so in the contrast, the possibility of survival is 94%, because there are only two outcomes for the credit event, default or not default. The possibility of survival just indicates there's no credit event occurs. So at any period, the possibility of survival plus possibility of default always equal to 1. The recovery rate RV equals 40%. The risk-free rate equals 5%. Each cash flow should be weighted with their possibility. So when the credit event occurs, the premium payments equals the possibility of the default times SPIR rate, which is 6% times SPIR rate, and the protection payment equals the possibility of default times 1 minus recovery rate, which is the 6% times 1 minus 40%. And if the credit event doesn't occur, the premium payment is possibility of survival times SPIR rate, which is 94% times SPIR rate, and the protection seller pay nothing because buyer didn't lose anything. Then sum up the payments separately. The premium payment equals SPIR rate, and the protection payment equals this. And then calculate the present value of them. Each payment should be discounted at risk-free rate. Make the present value of these two payments equal, we could calculate the SPIR rate. This is the logic to calculate the SPIR rate of CDS, but due to the time pressure, I cannot talk about the SPIR rate pricing formula for a long period. Everyone can read our report to know how to calculate it. But typically, there exists a limitation that is one of our assumptions we talked about before. The credit event only occurs at the end of the year. Actually, we can address it by splitting the 1-year period into increasingly shorter sub-periods and proceeding with the same methodology, but it would make the algebra more complicated. So we just assume it only occurs at the end of the year. And now let's move to the last part, is a real-world case. We talk about the subprime crisis, which is a financial storm because of a large number of default of subprime mortgage bonds, and resulting in a sharp fluctuation in the stock market. I think most of us heard about it because it's a very popular topic in the world. Also, there are many movies telling that story, like The Big Short. And how it goes. A mortgage is a loan that allows people to buy a house up from. And the subprime mortgage is a high-risk loans that issued to borrowers with low credit. Historically, banks would not lend money to people with bad credit, but in the early 2000s, the housing market was booming, so banks lend money to people who are less likely to be able to pay back because the bankers believe borrowers could make profits from the real estate. They have ability to pay them back after buying house. And the investor, traders, and bankers are throwing more money into the United States housing market. But in 2007, the housing bubble burst. As demand went down, the prices of homes dropped rapidly. People stopped investing in real estate, and many people were no longer able to pay off their mortgage. The foreclosed houses were now worth less money. Financial institutions lost money. The housing market failed. Banks collapsed. However, in the movie of Big Short, the main character Michael Berry and other investors predict this rig in real estate earlier. They shorted the housing market using CDS. They bought different lots, 100 millions of this credit default swap as an investment at their hedge fund from the bank like Goldman. At first, banks were willing to sell it because the housing market is very stable. Michael Berry was betting against the housing market. People thought he was very crazy, but we do see later the home buyers didn't pay the mortgage back to the bank. The mortgage-backed security were defaulted. So as the value of bonds fell, the CDS would rise, making Michael Berry and his hedge funds lots of money. That's the way to make money using CDS. People can buy it as an investment at their hedge fund. Okay, that's all of our presentation, and thanks for listening. Bye.